Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are, and welcome to our second Sip and Solve, where we take about 15 minutes, or the time for a coffee break, out of our busy days to discuss topics of interest that will hopefully help you develop new ideas or methods for your business. My name is Emily Garrett, and I'm an analytics consultant here at Experian, where I focus on the Ascend Analytical Sandbox for commercial data. It is afternoon here, so I've switched from my favorite black coffee to a soothing chamomile tea. I hope you've grabbed a cup of your favorite beverage and maybe a little snack as well. Today, we're going to get a little more into the weeds of data visualization, including why we use visualization, but also how we get there with data preparation and summarization. Let's jump right in. So I may have an exciting consulting career now, but before that, I was an analyst. And as an analyst, I learned to think in terms of SAS code, as you can see here, data sets, p-values, and on a good day, Excel spreadsheets, and maybe a pivot table if I was feeling particularly creative. I found that this often didn't translate into getting my proposals approved, however. I could spend weeks doing an analysis supporting a particular recommendation that was brilliant, if I might say so myself, only to struggle to get executive buy-in. I also found myself answering questions that were really in the weeds and seemed to distract from the larger analytical conclusion and recommendation. I decided it was time to stop poo-pooing visualization and signed up for a couple of classes to learn Tableau. To my surprise, adding this skill to my toolbox not only improved my communications with executives, it actually helped me to better understand my data and to better identify areas of opportunity for further exploration and analysis. Pivot tables are a great start and make things a lot easier than trying to summarize and format data manually using Excel. And pivot tables still have a very important role to play. But even summarizing data with pivot tables can leave us unable to process results. Like in this example where I'm looking at businesses by industry by state, I can't even fit the whole table on a slide, much less draw any meaningful conclusions about it. Let me just pause for a moment to point out that not all visualizations are created equal. Just as a lack of visualizations can make data difficult to interpret or understand, bad visualizations can do the same, or worse, they can actually distort your understanding. Take a look at the first example here on the left. The author set the y-axis to start at 65%, which you can see circled in pink there, instead of 0%. This creates the appearance that there is a large difference between the two methods. In reality, as you can see from the bottom chart, there is a very small difference between them. In the second chart, the author likely didn't purposefully mislead the audience, but chose an orientation that leads to a distorted view. In the top chart, the orientation of the pie chart makes the green slice look proportionally larger than it is. On the bottom corrected version of the chart, the change in orientation and addition of the bar chart does a much better job showing reality. And finally, the last chart, I'm not even sure I really even need to say anything about this, but it just has so much information that it cannot actually convey anything useful. You can't learn anything about the data that they're trying to share. Now let's move on to see how we can do better, and then we'll go over the process for getting there. Using Tableau or your other favorite visualization tool improves the situation, and then I can now process the information. This is a combination of the geographical frequency, where we are looking at the number of businesses by state in the construction industry. If I am interested in targeting a particular industry, this is certainly a big improvement because now I can see quickly that if I'd like to increase my business with construction firms, I might want to start with California, Texas, and Florida, where a lot of those businesses occur. That sounds obvious because those states have large proportions, but looking at New York, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, who also have large populations, the number is much lower. This goes back to my earlier point about visualizations showing you where opportunity may lie. In this case, I would probably think of other ways to look at this information, possibly as a percentage of all businesses or on a per capita basis or something else. This is a definite improvement, but still restricts us to one industry at a time via a filter. What we would really like to get to is something interactive and multifaceted like this. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll take a step back now and work through how we get to this point together. So how do we get started? In a word, planning. I myself am guilty of not always planning everything ahead of time. I love to just jump right in, but you really save yourself a lot of grief if you plan first. So figure out what you want to know and how you want your final layout to look. This is easier said than done, but you'll save more time if you plan well to start with. Identify your data. Don't forget anything you want to use as filters or dimensions. It's easy to remember you need risk scores and delinquency measures while forgetting that you need to show those by product type or vintage. And here's just a couple of examples of categorical variables that you might need, and then the measures, which I think are a little easier to think of because you know you're measuring bankruptcies or risk scores or whatever the case may be. Check all your data types and changes needed. While I was working on this example, I was working with a data source that stores a lot of data as a character type. That's fine unless you want to perform some mathematical operations on the variables like averages. Also, sometimes if it's in the wrong form and your program tries to interpret it, you might get some odd results that aren't realistic. So it's generally easiest to convert to the correct data type while pulling the data. And in this case, you can see that in the char BK is a character field, and I converted that during the coding to bankruptcy 24 months, which is a numerical value, and that allows me later on to add those and average them, et cetera. Code out any buckets or descriptions. So this generally allows for a more compact summary table so that then your end table is smaller and can be read more quickly by your program, and better standardization. This can usually be done in your visualization software, but I really find it much easier to do it ahead of time. Plus, then it's repeatable because you can copy and paste that code later. Another thing that I'll mention about this, you can see my example where I've got risk score classes that are a code, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this case. And then I've coded them to include both the code and the description. So when you're working with the people who are the analysts, and we all tend to think in terms of codes, and then you are trying to communicate that to an audience for whom those codes don't mean anything, this is a really good practice to kind of make it make sense for both sides of that equation. Summarize as much as possible to reduce the file size. This really makes everything run much more quickly. I have found that even though the visualization software can handle technically a lot of rows of data, it's just a lot more efficient in running data, updating data, and even saving your dashboards if you try to cut this down as much as possible. Then you just export or connect to a table directly. In my example, I used a proc summary in SAS, but GroupBy in SQL or other summarization technique will also work. I exported to Excel and then used an extract, but another method I really like is to connect directly to a Hadoop table using Cloudera. Then my dashboards update when I update my data. Check your variable types again after you've imported them. You may be able to make some changes directly in the tool, but if not, it's better to go back and rerun your data now. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we get pretty far down the path and we're trying to make changes within the program because we don't want to go back and rerun it. But often you just end up having to go back and rerun anyway, and then you have to fix things. It's really just better to make sure everything is all set up initially. And then start building the individual components and have fun. This is where you can really get creative. You can start to see things in your data that you might want to explore later. I often get a lot of ideas for other things I'd like to analyze while I'm doing this portion of it. So now I'll just give a few examples of building out the individual components that went into that dashboard that I showed earlier. So here is the map, which is showing the number of active businesses within the states. Then I built out a detail. So this is why I say things like pivot tables still really have their place. Sometimes you really just have to see the underlying detail, and visualization tools will let you build those components as well. Here is a visual which shows the proportion of the segment by the industry risk, those groupings that we looked at earlier where we have the code and the description. And voila, here is the final dashboard for this example. Now I've taken all that data and put it in one view where I can dig in as needed. So if my recommendation is focused on certain industries in certain states, I can show that easily. I can also change views if I get a question about a different industry and or a different state, for example. So all of this has been built so that there are interactive filters within it. If I click on New York State, I'm going to only have data everywhere else for New York State. Going back to the construction example, you can see where I can apply those filters. So in this case, I want to look at construction. So I click that line in the detail view, and it gives me the number for that industry, the map adjusted, as well as the relative detail chart, the risk chart, and the delinquency chart. So I can also look at an individual state or states for more insight. Looking at Florida, for example, I have a lot of construction companies, but also they appear to be higher risk with higher risk scores and also a higher rate of delinquency than the overall trends. And now for my favorite part about using visualization software, it's repeatable. So now you can spend more time every month doing those deep dive analyses that are more interesting, result in more actions, and are more fun. When you rerun your data next month and updated data is added, you can refresh this and see the new information immediately. This frees up analyst time and also provides opportunities to spot trends more quickly because you aren't waiting on the development of monthly reporting. So it might not have been immediately obvious here, but in my previous example, we started with March 2017, and then so that we have a year-over-year March to March 2018 and a few months leading up to it. And then in this case, everything is updated, and now we have April. And that can be done pretty easily. And instead of getting calls at the beginning of the month asking when are those pivot reports going to be updated for the month, you can just run the code, hit refresh, and republish a new report. Well, that was a quick break, and I hope everyone really enjoyed the topic. I thank you for joining me today on a journey through the weeds of developing your data for visualization. I hope it was an informative way to spend your coffee break. As always, if you'd like to learn more about using data visualizations to understand your portfolio versus the industry or another type of analysis, please let us know. Please also share any questions or suggestions for topics with us for future blog posts or Sip and Solve sessions. And for just a quick plug for the Analytical Sandbox, the demonstration that I walked through today was created in that environment. It provides all the tools needed for this type of work, as well as more advanced modeling tools. I hope you'll join us for future Sip and Solve sessions. If you click through and join the list, you'll be kept in the loop about future sessions and topics. Also on that page, you can find recordings of the sessions that we've already held. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.